Hey y'all, happy Thursday. Today I want to talk about the black queer babies. Okay, today this episode is for you. Hey y'all, welcome back if you're returning, and hello if this is your first time. My name is Timothy DuWhite, and these are the DuWhite pages. Thank y'all. If this is your first time, I have a studio audience, so big up to y'all and big up to you. Alright, so today I really wanted to talk about, as I said in my opening, the black queer babies. So yes, today what we're going to do is I'm going to be discussing 3 different texts that's all centered around black queer adolescents. So they're black queer YA novels, well, 2 novels and 1 memoir. Yeah, I'm really excited, and what I really want to do, or my aim for this video, is for us to sort of like talk about the narratives in these different stories and what they're doing, but also use these stories as sort of like a launching pad, extrapolate on the different ways we can be better as like adults, as like human beings, as people existing in this world, how we can be better to black queer youth in our lives and in this like overall planet, right? Use these texts as sort of like a jumping off point as we dive into the discussion of what it means to be black, queer, and young, and what it meant for me and what it could potentially mean for a lot of black queer youth out there existing now, with these sort of texts to pull from that I personally didn't have growing up, you feel me? So yeah, I'm super excited for this. Yeah. So I just wanted to take a moment to offer a little more context as to why I felt like this conversation was so very important, and why I think us finding strategies to be better to our black youth is a conversation that we must be having all year long, and not just in February during Black History Month. But I figured this would be a good enough time as any to at least introduce it. So what you're seeing right now are different statistics taken from the 2019 Black and African American LGBTQ Youth Report that was put together by the Human Rights Campaign. Now, personally, I have my issues with our HRC, but I did think this would be useful for the purposes of our conversation. So yes, feel free to check out some of these statistics, but also more importantly than a statistic is find ways to interact directly with black youth. They will be better able to tell you what they're dealing with far more than any number. All right, so let's get back. All right, so the 3 books that I'll be discussing today are The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta, Everybody Looking by Candice Iloh, and All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. So what made me really want to do the discussions, because after reading these books, or rather while I was reading these books, I kept finding myself sort of daydreaming or imagining myself young while reading these, in particular for George's book, but all of them really. I just kept imagining myself while I was reading as like a younger Tim, and just thinking about the sort of thoughts, all the sort of internal conversations I will be having with myself if I were able to like hold on and like grip into these texts that in many ways reflect a lot of the experiences I was going through growing up. And it was super cathartic, and it was also just super eye-opening as it relates to me realizing the sort of desires that I had during that time, and how while reading this, I realized that those desires never left. Like when I was reading this, I wanted to I still had the desire to be 16 reading this while I was reading this at the current age I am now. So yeah, I think that's just really fascinating to think about the younger you. Like for me, it'll be the younger black queer Tim existing and just like scouring for some type of solid ground, and how in many ways reading these stories I started to feel like that sort of reconciliation in that space. Granted, I loved certain things more than others as it relates to all these books. Like I'm still like a book critic and all that, but this video is not really about that. This video is about what these sort of texts, as well as just the sort of idea of being able to have the sort of conversations these books are having openly, and what that can do and how that could possibly affect a young person. So let's just get into it. So the first book I really wanted to sort of start to explore and start our conversation off today with is Everybody Looking by Candice Iloh. So in this book, we follow our main character, Atta, who is we actually see her through various different stages of her academic career. Young Nigerian girl about to go off to college. She has a love for dancing that hasn't necessarily been embraced or encouraged by her super religious Catholic family. Atta in this story experiences a lot of like psychological abuse, in particular from her family, in particular her father, who is very Bible thumping, and this really affects the way that she sees herself, sees her body in relation to her dance, as well as her sexuality and what she is expected to be and what she is expected to do with herself. So this one, as well as Black Flamingo, are both told in verse, which I think is a very very useful tool as it relates to telling these stories, and I can get into that a little more later. To, I guess, preface all this, everything I'm saying about the experience of being Black, young, and queer is just from my perspective, right? There's no one unifying, universal way of existing in this identity, right? It shows up in different ways for different people. There are similarities, but then there are differences depending on who you are, and there's many factors. So yeah, everything I'm saying, I preface it off, but this is my experience. What I found to be super useful in the conversation of how we can advocate and how we can like show up for Black queer youth of today is the way that Candice wrote and sort of explained the disconnection and the severing Atta experienced through her parents from her desires and who she is and her body. And this happened in many ways. One of the ways that this happened is through the indoctrination of Catholicism and all that she was expected and all that was expected of her as being Catholic, right? And I think it's pretty self-explanatory to say that in a book that is centering a young queer Black adolescent, any introduction of church or organized religion tends to alert to a particular like an issue, or like perhaps this would be like a cause of discussion, a problem, right? And this book isn't immune to that. In this book, she talks a lot about how fear of her body came from church, and it came from her father in particular, and what her father expected of her. And there's something just so important about affirming Black queer youth in the use of their bodies that I think the author Candice did really well in sort of highlighting here. In my own experience, I find that, or I've experienced a lot of like my own understanding of my body and my own like negotiation of my body being so heavily influenced by not only organized religion but also homophobia and like those two things created an inherent fear in me of how my body naturally responds to the world and responds to stimuli and responds to existing, right? A quick story about that is, when I was younger, I used to live in Tennessee. I grew up in the military, so my father, like every year, we was moving to another different state and whole new friends, whole new environment, which as a young Black queer child was actually very helpful in the means that I was able to renegotiate who I was in a particular space pretty easily. Like I could reinvent myself. So if anybody I felt like it was coming too close or getting too aware of my queerness, it was fine because I could leave that place and then self-correct everything I did in the previous state that caused people to like feel alert. So if I learned that, okay, I can't say these certain words when I moved to this new town, I was so transient that I, with every destination, was able to form myself straighter and straighter and straighter, which is a whole nother thing. But the reason I bring it up as it relates to this book is when I was in Tennessee, one of the things that sort of was a checkpoint for me to further on my desire to appear straight is I was outside. I had to be about maybe 11 or maybe 10, like around that age, if not a little younger. And I was outside of my house and the whole block was out. And I lived in an all Black neighborhood and the whole block was just like, it was just a nice day, so everyone was out having a good time. So while we're out, I saw these two girls talking to each other while this boy was walking up the block. And for me, it just seemed like he was walking like just a regular Black boy, you know, out here walking like everybody else. And I noticed one of the girls turn to a friend and say, "Oh, he's fine," right? Like into him. And then the other girl turned back to her and said, "Do you see how he walk? He ain't interested in you." And y'all, that was the first moment that it dawned on me that it was possible for someone to read my queerness just by the way I move my body. Like, it blew my mind. I was like, walk? Is how he's just walking. Like, what? Like, it blew my mind to the point where I was terrified. I got really like scared and I just like sort of clamped up and I was like, oh my God, I don't even want to walk. And mind you, I was right in front of my house. It would have been a few steps to go home, but I was like, I don't even want to walk home because I don't know what my walk would tell the rest of the block. And I remember after that day, when I finally did go home, I used to watch my brother and father walk and just see how a man was supposed to move. And from that moment on, I just imitated them to the point where now I don't even know if the gait of my walk is my own or it's something I've used, you know? And I bring it out to say that the way that Atta's body is policed and the way that Atta struggled with like being able to let her body just free, and not even free in the sense of like her queerness is not heavily attached to like her desire for another girl, right? Like there are moments of like flirtation and stuff like that, but that's not even like the breadth of her queerness. A lot of her queerness is just in her desire to like be in her body freely. It's the idea of a Black young girl living in her body fully amongst herself and just of herself is a queer idea, right? And I think Candice did an amazing job of like pinpointing that struggle and pinpointing the sort of limitation that are placed on queer youth that for me informed my entire, just the very way I move about the world. Like that, what I've taught when I was younger has completely transformed and altered the way that I even step. So yeah, and I think this is a wonderful book and a wonderful choice to say this book in poems, because it's something about the lyric that also adds to the tender and the that adds to the importance and the like legitimacy of what Atta is mourning, that she doesn't even know that she's mourning, that she doesn't even know that she needs to like fight and like fight like hell to unearth and bring back to life in herself. So yeah, I'm thankful for this, and I wish when I was younger I would have been able to read this. So the next book I want to get into and sort of continue this discussion around like the ways that we could show up and support our black queer youth is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. As I said before, this is also novel told in verse. In this story, we follow our main character, Michael, who is both Jamaican and Greek and lives in London. Follow him throughout his academic career from around like kindergarten to university. And we follow as he experiences an absent father. In this story, he is estranged from his father. His father is there, but not there. And we watch as Michael navigates his desire for a sort of male role model, while he's also trying to understand himself and understand his own like identity. So that's one through line of this story that I thought was very, not so much interesting as it is just like real. And I would have been thankful as well to have like been able to read this sort of narrative back in the day. He eventually reaches to university where he stumbles upon this drag club on campus where they put on drag performances, and all the members have their different alter egos that they put on the whole makeup and wigs and do the whole show. So Michael finds this club, and through this club begins to piece together who they believe their identity to be, in spite of the various different ways that their identity has been delegitimized by so many different communities in which they are part of. I enjoyed this book in particular because Michael, even when he started to like experiment with drag and started to like really live within what he believed to be his true identity, or like rather steps towards whatever that identity feels to be right for him, he still remained Michael the whole time. And no matter whatever ways that he decided to perform his gender or his existence at that moment, he still stayed at the core who he was. And I think that was just so great. And it's also such a testament to the ways that we need to start trusting Black youth more when they tell us who they are, and trust them in the sense that we start to start believing them when they tell us who they are, and start believing that they know who they are. And because I think, especially adults, we just are so quick to disbelieve children, and I feel like in particular Black queer children, and that has to do with like anti-Blackness, has to do with like queer phobia, a lot of things, but it also has to do with like Black queer children are a threat because they are literally our future, right? So I think this sort of societal consensus to ignore this like population of like minds and like visionaries, right, is a part of the plan. But I think what Dean Atta reminds us of is that these youth are the ones who teach us how to perform our own identities, right? And it also teaches us that this is all a performance, right? And I think that is a thing that will be really good for us to do as it relates to like upholding Black youth, is just affirming that whatever ways they decide to, in particular, perform their gender, they are valid, right? And they are loved regardless. Because I feel like and also just thanking them for the lesson that this is all a performance. All of the gender is performance. Everything we do as it relates to like putting on clothes or going outside to exist is all a performance that we can decide to do one way one day or decide to do another. And a lot of people are afraid of changing it up and like adding a sort of variety into how they present themselves to the world, but others aren't, right? And I think that is a worthwhile thing to cultivate and to love within, in particular, our Black youth. So yeah, I really love this book in the ways that it talks about identity, and the ways that it talks about the fluidity of identity, and like who we are exists in many different facets in many different ways, but we are always the ones who should be given the opportunity to choose that. And I think Michael is a great testament to choosing who they are. So the final book I would like to bring into the discussion that we're having around taking care of and showing love to our Black youth is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. One difference about this book is, for one, it's not told in verse, it's told in prose, but also it is not a fiction, it is a Black queer YA memoir manifesto, which is actually the first sort of within this genre that I know of. So in this we follow our author George as he pulls back on time and tells us about his childhood through the lens of being now this very prominent journalist who analyzes race, queer politics within, you know, the general population, and he's using that eye to like focus on his childhood as his own sense of catharsis, it feels like, but also as a means to give back to Black queer youth, that sort of imparting lessons and stories and things that he wished he would have been able to hear. So in this book we follow George, similar to the others, through his academic career. We follow him in like middle school, high school, throughout to to college. Another sort of paired story within this is his relationship with his grandmother, and a lot of the story centers around not only his progression throughout school and throughout like years of living, but also his progression along with his love for his grandmother and his inevitable sickness of his grandmother, and how he became a caretaker towards her. This book is really, it's super beautiful. I really enjoyed it. It gave me, high-key, I used to say it was like gay soul food. It gave me very gay soul food vibes, and it just made me smile. And when I talked about reading these books and just thinking about myself younger, reading them, this book definitely did that for me. Like when I was reading George's words, I was just thinking about being young Tim, finding this book and like hearing people say those sort of things. And it just felt like, I don't know, it just felt like a part of me that was still yearning for that voice was quelled in the reading of this and in the reading of a lot of these other books. And I also want to be clear when I talk about like what younger me would have loved to have seen or loved to experience. I'm not saying this necessarily as a promotion of like representation, right? Like that, or to say like, oh, this is why representation is important, because I feel like when we talk about representation, it becomes a very narrow conversation and a narrow dream or goal, rather. Like when I say younger me would have loved to have like read this book, I'm also saying that younger me would have loved to have known someone like George who was out and also safe, right? While he was out and he wasn't like experiencing violence. I would have loved to live in a world where I could have met George in person while I was younger and like got these stories imparted on me without the hindrance of the world, right? So what like annoys me is that like the goal for representation shouldn't be to have more books like this or have more like X identity in a movie that we could finally see. The goal is for us to be able to have these people and have these like stories and these like experiences that we say would have meant so much to us become a normal and become an everyday occurrence, become like a neighbor or a or like your crossing guard or like just a regular fabric of the existence that you live in. That's the sort of representation I want to see. Yeah, so like that's my end goal, and that's why I also want to offer these sort of like, I don't know, like have these sort of offerings of what we can like give to Black youth, because it goes further than just the page, right? Even though the page is important, but I hope we take from the page the world that we want to live in, like physically, right? So yeah, to go back to his book, I'll say the sort of like offering this book brings to me as it relates to how we can be better to Black queer youth is just affirming that they are a part of your family. You know, I feel like there's so many Black queer youth who exist in families where they feel like an outsider. They feel like they don't really belong. I know that's not, yes, like I feel like there's a lot of Black queer youth who exist in that space. And it was nice to see and read this story about George, who had a family that just corralled it around him at every point. And seeing that was really just, it was really, really important to me. And I think we can do that in the tangible. We can do that for the youth in our lives. We can let them know that they are a part of the here, right? That yes, they can go and create a family, and found families are amazing, but it's also wonderful to like get affirmation and get held up by the tribe you were born into. So yeah, I think that is a great thing for us to take from this book, and just take from a lot of what these books have talked about, and what a lot of these characters within this book, whether they be actual or fictional, seem to have desired. All right, yes, that is this video. I just love Black children. I love all my Black kids. I love all my Black queer kids. I love all of them, and I just know that I can be better towards them, and I know the world can be better towards them, and I know probably you watching this can probably be better towards them as well, and making a world that they are safe in, and a world that they can exist in fully, without hindrance and without interruption. So I'm gonna leave in the description box just some organizations that does work related and with Black queer youth. Also, I'm gonna try to find any like Black queer youth led initiatives that you can possibly donate to. So yeah, I'm gonna leave all that in the description box, so please go check it out. If you made it to the end of this video, please put in your comment a Black heart emoji so I know you made it to the very end. All right, see you next week. Bye.